Welcome back, folks, to Crypto Evolution and Part 2 with Andreas Antonopoulos. See what he's got to say on Bitcoin tech and also Ethereum and DeFi and what Satoshi would have thought. Now, if you missed the first video, links up above. Go back and watch it. I've had a great response, best response to a video so far. If you continue to like what I'm producing, please show us a like and subscribe. More importantly, give us a comment below. Tell me what you think of the interview. So, good, bad, or the ugly, that's okay. Look, thanks very much for watching, folks, and enjoy. So, Andreas, how do you see the tech side of things currently? And how will this improve Bitcoin? Now, be it Snore, signatures, Taproot, or second-layer solutions such as Lightning?
Well, Bitcoin continues to develop, and as it scales up, problems arise, and those problems are addressed. And everybody has great solutions to all of the big problems in the cryptocurrency space. And the simpler and easier the solution is, the more you need to scrutinize it carefully, because these are not simple problems, and question the answers you're being given. Bitcoin is trying to not only scale, but also remain robust and secure and resistant to even colluding nation states from attacking it, be able to survive very difficult conditions and maintain both the soundness of the money and the robustness of the systems. And in order to do that, the choices are not as easy as make giant blocks or do confirmation every second or other types of solutions like that, which you'll see a lot of competitors to Bitcoin doing. And they say, well, we've already solved the scaling problem. Yes, you've solved the scaling problem at a tiny scale while sacrificing decentralization and robustness. And that's an easy solution, but it's not the right one.
Sure, it's like what they gained in, I guess, speed, they've lost in security.
Yes, if they've even gained really in speed, because ultimately, testing it with 500 transactions a month isn't really testing a system at scale. So from that perspective, it's Bitcoin is currently moving in a conservative but very focused way in developing technologies that increase privacy and robustness while at the same time addressing issues of scale. And I think that's the right roadmap. But then again, in this particular industry, it's not going to be, in my opinion, just one system that succeeds. And we don't have to choose just one path forward. In fact, right now in the industry, we are in a period of fragmentation and experimentation where all possible paths are being explored. So from that perspective, it matters how these technologies are tested under real world conditions with basically real money on the line and real users who are doing real economic activity on them. And that's the ultimate proof of success. It's not in a white paper. But, interestingly enough, there are now a number of different cryptocurrencies and blockchains, more than one, that are doing testing at fairly significant scale. So not the scale of Bitcoin, but maybe the scale of where Bitcoin was in 2013, 2014. And that is really promising. They may not get it right, but we will learn a lot even if they get it wrong. And maybe they find some other interesting paths to explore. So to me, this is a long journey which involves traveling across many paths and trying many different things. And there's no one right answer. I think we have to be open to more experimentation.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. Now, what's your view, Andreas, on Bitcoin as a store of value as opposed to gold or in line with gold? And is that how you see it being in the future?
Well, I think it makes a pretty good store of value as long as your perspective is long term. Beyond that, I use it as a medium of exchange all the time on a regular basis. Effectively, on a weekly basis, I make transactions. I pay some of my staff with Bitcoin. I get paid myself for work I do in Bitcoin. I have a little experimental store where we're doing a bit of retail activity. So this is part of the experience of Bitcoin for me, is also as a medium of exchange. But I do think that at the moment, certainly, and given the problems we face in the world, its store of value aspect is its strongest. And part of the reason for that is because over the past 10 years, due to the actions of central banks attempting to prevent or end the 2008 crisis, what happened was that currencies worldwide were debased and an enormous amount of money was injected into the economies of different countries. And as a result, the markets stopped really responding to fundamentals. So whereas before, if you studied economics and just basic finance in the 90s, I remember the general idea was that stocks and bonds were counter-correlated. So when stocks go up, bonds go down. When bonds go up, stocks go down. Not anymore. Everything goes up and goes down simultaneously. And part of the reason that happens is because what they're responding to is not fundamental activity in the economy, but instead whether the central bank is introducing new stimulus or not. And you end up with this really perverse situation where good news is bad news and bad news is good news. So when you have a crisis, that essentially tells you that the central bank is going to intervene with stimulus, which means cheap and free money for everyone, and everything goes up because there's a crisis imminent. And then when the economy is doing well and companies are reporting great results, people start believing that the central bank is going to stop its intervention, and everything goes down because they expect the cheap money is going to run out. It's a very bizarre situation. So in a world like that, it's very difficult to find yield, to find value. So where do you park your investments? If you're planning to retire, if you have a tiny bit of savings, where do you put it so that it doesn't end up simply wasting away due to inflation? Of course, that's not as much of a problem in developed countries where inflation is relatively low. But even there, it is a problem. So I think right now Bitcoin is shining as a store of value, not because it is inherently much better as a store of value than a medium of exchange, although there is some of that, but because all of the comparative things that you might invest in are not doing a very good job as a store of value, except for gold. So I think Bitcoin is very effectively competing against gold. It has sound money characteristics that are much stronger than gold. It is very inelastic in its supply, and at the same time, it's gold that you can email across the planet very easily in seconds. So those are characteristics that gold can't fulfill. The question is, does it also, I think, does it also occupy the same space in our culture as gold does? Because part of the reason that gold is effective as a store of value is the shared belief in our culture that it is a long-term ancient store of value that will always be around. Bitcoin doesn't have that yet. It doesn't have that cultural significance, which means that in a crisis it may end up not being a good store of value, and that's one of the things I worry about. If investment in tech stocks dries up, we might see a decline in the price of Bitcoin rather than an increase. So I don't think we should take any of these concepts for granted. I don't think that Bitcoin is established as a store of value any more than it's established as a medium of exchange. So far, it's looking good. But we're still in a very experimental phase, which is why, as an investment, this is still very volatile and full of surprises. That's what makes it interesting.
Absolutely. I guess one key part of it is, we saw in Greece and Cyprus, the bailout or bail-in. I remember seeing a lady go into the ATM and literally she couldn't get any money out of the bank. So that fear of anyone can take your money if it's sitting in a bank. Whereas Bitcoin, it's
right.
You control your keys. That's something that's really important to me, anyways.
Yeah, and keep in mind that's currently happening in India, where currency controls from banks continue to be imposed, and they're in a very shaky situation with their financial system. And we're going to see that experiment repeated elsewhere. It's going to happen again and again around the country. And sometimes it's not even a matter of currency controls. Traveling throughout Central and South America, I can tell you there are certain days that they fill the ATMs. Mondays usually a good day. And Monday and Tuesdays, there's a line, 15 people long in front of the ATM to take money out. And by Wednesday or Thursday, most of the ATMs are out of money. So even though there are not currency controls because of inflation, because of small bills, because of lack of sufficient infrastructure, the effect is the same. You have money in the bank, but you can't withdraw it because there is no ATM that has cash in it.
Now, moving on to Ethereum briefly. Now, do you see, because you obviously wrote Mastering Ethereum as well. I've got a lot of your books here, as you can see.
Oh, thank you.
Now, onto Ethereum. Now, do you see exciting things on the horizon with the whole DeFi space or Ethereum 2.0?
First of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to make a little announcement. Mastering Ethereum is now a year old, and as part of our celebration of its 1-year anniversary, we changed the license. It was previously licensed as Creative Commons, no commercial, non-derivative. And now it's Creative Commons share alike, which means it's a wide open free culture license. You can take the book, you can mash it up, you can take the contents, you can repackage them, you can sell copies of the book, you can translate it, you can produce PDFs, print them, all fully allowed under the license. And I'm hoping that's kind of the next stage we take with this book. Really, it's about delivering that education to as many people in as many languages as possible. You can visit it on GitHub now, and I'm inviting volunteers to come and help us translate Mastering Ethereum into many different languages, just as we did with Mastering Bitcoin. So that's my brief announcement. As for where Ethereum is going, DeFi is very interesting, and I think that it holds within it the same kind of conflict that we saw with the ICOs. On the one hand, it is full of exciting developments, some really interesting innovation, and some things that could not be done previously that can be done now. Some really novel concepts and novel technologies being tested, and some of them at surprisingly large scale. And at the same time, we have to recognize that these are still very, very immature technologies, and not very well tested, and built themselves on components that themselves are fairly immature and not very well tested at scale, which means that we are going to have again and again and again little tragedies and horror stories that are going to emerge from this.
Well, yeah, we saw that exploit with that smart contract the other day.
Which is, well, I mean, that's just the latest, but it's the latest in a long string of these things. And it's fascinating, actually, if you read about what they did there, is they use the composability of decentralized finance or DeFi projects to build a transaction that pulled money through several different services in such a way as to affect
arbitrage.
It wasn't just arbitrage; it was a bit of a pump and dump scheme. Effectively, they managed to short sell wrapped Bitcoin whilst.
That's right. I believe half went to short and half went to actually drop the price to gain on that short, and it all went back in the same transaction.
So they borrowed money, put in a short. Dumped the asset in order to cause the short to trigger, and then paid back the loan all in a single transaction. And again, you look at that and it's horrifying. But at the same time, it's fascinating that that can be done. That you can create a sequence of financial services in a single transaction that execute atomically, as in all or nothing, in such a way. I mean, it's a brilliant exploit. And it also shows, it demonstrates the real power of DeFi, which is this composability. And it also demonstrates the real weakness of DeFi, which is that it's not yet to the level of maturity that can resist these attacks. But that's a matter of iterations. I've always believed that systems built on Ethereum will mature, will require much more iteration to reach the maturity and robustness of things like Bitcoin. And they may never reach that level of robustness. But the number of interesting and useful things that can be done, even at a lower level of security and robustness, is pretty astonishing. So I'm really interested in watching how this experiment develops. Just like the ICO space, you can accept that 99.99% of the ICOs that launched in 2017 were garbage. At the same time, the whole concept of making these offerings and crowdfunding options that allow any investor to connect with any investment or startup anywhere in the world in an open field of capital in a completely free and open market, I mean, that's really one of the most interesting things that's happened to finance in the last 100 years. And that will, without a doubt in my mind, revolutionize how startups are being built. It bridges the gap between organic early stage funding and IPO in a stock market, and opens the door to a lot more variety. With that, you get all the junk. But you have to be able to see both sides of this simultaneously. The fact that the vision, the spark of that is there, and it will have profound implications, but the vast majority of what's actually being deployed may be garbage in the short term. If you can hold both of those ideas simultaneously in your head, then I think you can really see this technology. It really is a double-sided coin. And the same thing applies to DeFi. As for Ethereum 2.0, I think it's fascinating how fast the research and innovation has progressed there. There's very interesting things happening in scaling, not just with 2.0, but also with roll-up technologies and other layer 2 networks that are being applied in Ethereum. And these are very, very useful research topics and experiments for every cryptocurrency. We can learn a lot from watching these. I do think eventually they're going to get there. I just don't know how long it's going to take. Now,
Andreas, do you think it's actually all working as Satoshi wanted? Or look, would Satoshi have made some changes along the way?
Oh, we know for a fact that it's not going the way Satoshi wanted, because Satoshi talked about that. So up to 2010, when Satoshi disappeared, it had already become apparent that some things were not going the way Satoshi expected. Satoshi did not predict the development of ASICs. Satoshi did not predict the concentration of mining. The idea that people would go out and buy a $4,000 piece of equipment specifically to mine Bitcoin at megawatts of electricity, kilowatts of electricity, and then stack 100,000 of them in a warehouse. That never crossed. So I think it's important to realize that no matter what the initial design choices, which in many ways were brilliant, the design choices, the mix of parameters that make up the issuance system, the block propagation system, the difficulty adjustments in mining for proof of work, all of those things were so perfect that they created this unstoppable machine. And part of that is survivorship bias, right? Why was Bitcoin so perfect? Well, it's because all of the other things that weren't died early. And, so we're observing the survivor that happened to have exactly the right mix of choices in its algorithm. Satoshi managed to predict many things very, very well with incredible prescience, and also tuned the components of Bitcoin very, very well. But almost within 2 years, it had already changed in such a way that it was evolving away from what Satoshi had envisioned. And
well, yeah, the CPUs weren't lasting long, and then all of a sudden it was the GPUs, and
right.
It moved quite quickly, didn't it?
And while the general parameters and the general goals are very much in play, I think, if anything, Satoshi would be surprised at how incredibly well things have gone. Because Satoshi was a skeptic. They were not sure that this would play out successfully. The idea that now this is a system of such enormous size that it's playing an important role on the international stage, that it's causing people who should otherwise not find any reason to comment about this thing to comment about it. All of those things, I think, were far, far beyond what anyone could have imagined in the early days, and I think we're all continuously astounded and astonished by its development. I think it's managed to fulfill Satoshi's visions in terms of the big picture, in terms of being a system of digital cash that is peer-to-peer, that opens the gates of finance and removes intermediates and creates a very, very powerful new technological phenomenon. In that way, it has already succeeded completely. And even if Bitcoin went away tomorrow, it's already succeeded because it showed the world that this was possible. And once people know that it's possible, they will rebuild it from scratch as many times as necessary, if necessary, in order to succeed. But right now, Bitcoin doesn't seem to be going away anyway.
Absolutely. Look, that's it. Look, I really appreciate your time, Andreas. And, you're obviously around on world stages talking to thousands of people. So for you to make the time to come on my little channel there, which I've just started. So I started to just educate people who, they look at me when I'm talking about it like I've got a second head. So I thought I'd put it down into a video, mainly for my friends and family this is what I'm working on. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, I mean, that's in the best spirit of open source and the sharing economy that we're all part of. It's about taking something that you're passionate and enthusiastic about and trying to share it in the world as much as possible. And in that, we are kindred spirits. So good luck with the show, and thanks for having me on, and all the best.
There you have it, folks. Thanks again for tuning in and watching that. Again, thank you to Andreas Antonopoulos for being such a gracious host. Okay, I really enjoyed what he had to say. It's a shame I didn't have it a little bit longer. So, look, if you did enjoy that content, guys, hit the like button, and more importantly, subscribe, and give us a comment down below. Tell us what you thought of it. So, if you head over to my Twitter, again, there is this is Andreas's book, The Internet of Money, Volume 2. I'm giving that out to someone. There's a pinned tweet there on my Twitter account. Go over there, follow the instructions there for the competition, and I'll be, what's it, the 10th now in Australia anyways. I'll be giving that away in about 4 days. Look, it's only a book, guys, but it's a fantastic read. So thanks again, guys, for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next video. Cheers, guys.